Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Lucie. I'm Creative Editorial Director at Bauer Media. This event is something really close to my heart. We've campaigned over the last couple of years along with Mental Health First Aid England for parity between mental health first aid and physical first aid. So it's a real honour to host this session today on why domestic abuse is an employer's business and the implications for your mental health strategy. I've got some brilliant people on my panel, so without further ado, let's meet them. First up, we have Lorna Gavin, Head of Diversity and Inclusion and Corporate Responsibility and previously partner at the international law firm Gowling WLG, who has introduced a programme which has brought domestic violence out into the open. You can come on down. It's a long walk as part of the firm's wellbeing agenda and has been a game changer in the firm's culture. Welcome, Lorna. Take a seat. Next, we have Paul Quinlan, Head of Employee Relations at EY, a professional services firm. He has responsibility for EY's health, mental health and wellbeing programme called Health EY, which has won several awards. In 2018, EY engaged with the Everyone's Business programme and launched a domestic abuse guide, special paid leave and awareness training for key stakeholders. Come to the stage, Paul. Round of applause for Paul. It's a long old walk, isn't it, this way? Thanks, Paul. Welcome. And last but by no means least, we have Melanie Brown, one of the iconic Spice Girls, whose reunion tour this year was named the biggest live event of 2019. She's a TV personality across the globe, currently being captain on ITV2's Celebrity Juice. And Mel has been an international star for 20 years, here she is, but recently she's become a champion for victims of domestic violence. Her best-selling book, Brutally Honest, which told the story of her 10-year abusive marriage, topped the Sunday Times bestseller list and resulted in her being made a patron of Women's Aid and being asked to number 10 Downing Street to advise on a bill to help women receive better financial aid and enable them to leave abusive marriages. Thank you very much, guys, for joining us today. So, Mel, only a couple of days ago, you shared a stat from Women's Aid, which basically said that the police receive over 100
calls an hour.
100 calls.
Turn into abuse, yeah. I think what people don't really realise is that we're dealing with a massive epidemic. You know, it's happening more than we even think so. And the statistics are just through the roof.
Yeah.
And women are 3 times more likely to be affected by mental health issues if they've been abused. And, you know, some women don't even know, some women and men don't even know they're even in the middle of a coercive behaviour relationship or even an abusive relationship. So when I started writing my book, I actually put in the back of my book the 15 signs of realising that you're in an abusive relationship. And to be honest, I didn't even realise my 10-year marriage was that bad until I left him and I started writing it. I mean, I knew physically it was bad, but all the other abuse that was going on underneath, I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
It was shocking. And then for me also really challenging because my story was kind of out there, but only from his side. So I had to put my side out.
Yeah. And it was 10 years, wasn't it? And did anyone suspect, like, because your family, friends, I mean, obviously the nation didn't know until it came out, but did anyone suspect? Or not?
Well, I think I became a very good liar. So I didn't want anybody to know. I didn't want anybody to know at work. I'd cover myself up. I'd pretend that I was just okay. And when you're in those kind of relationships, you get cut off from your friends and from your family. So you have no direct help, you know, apart from going to a refuge or going to, like, calling up the police. But for somebody like me, I didn't even want to admit it to myself, let alone admit it to anybody else. And I didn't want, you know, my police call to go all over the press. I didn't want it to be done like that. So I decided to do it in a different way by writing a book, by talking about my experiences. And I didn't know if anybody was going to believe me in my book. Luckily, my mum wrote her own chapter, my sister wrote her own chapter, my 20-year-old daughter wrote her own chapter. So it was other people's opinion and what they saw happening to me at the time, which was horrific.
Yeah.
But work for me was my safe place.
Yeah, I mean, obviously your work is slightly different to everybody else, but you
just a bit
slightly. But did your employer do anything about it? Did they see any signs?
Well, they didn't see direct signs, but like, for example, when I was judging on some of the many panels that I've been on, if my then husband, if he was around me, because it's live, it would completely affect the way that I would conduct myself. I'd be very nervous, and I'm not really nervous in front of the camera. I'd be very insecure and insular. So one of my employers in particular just banned him from ever coming on set without even questioning, because they saw how I crumbled basically whenever he was around, and that I couldn't hide.
And how did that affect you? Did you think, I don't need to be protected, or did that make a massive difference?
It made a huge difference, because they saw some signs, and they saw enough signs to know that I wasn't okay when he was around me.
Yeah.
So that helped me to kind of not only have the courage to leave him, to know that my employees were going to be there for me, but it also made me think, well, okay, I'm not going mad. Somebody else has noticed a change. And that to me was huge, absolutely huge.
And one of the most shocking things, I think, is, it's not categorised by personality type. It can happen to any man or any woman.
Yeah, abuse doesn't segregate colour, race, how successful or non-successful you are, how rich you are, how poor you are.
But people on the outside will think she's a really strong woman. Does it happen more to people who are sometimes kind of strong and people think they're quite together?
Well, I think it can basically happen to anyone. But I think an abuser, it's their challenge is to break a strong, independent, opinionated woman. That's one of the things that is kind of attractive to these abusers. And you don't go looking for an abuser comes and seeks you out and finds you. And usually it's when you're at your most vulnerable, and they swoop in like Prince Charming.
Yeah.
And they, bit by bit, day by day, month by month, year by year, they completely destroy your everything. And that's why I was so thankful in those 10 years that I didn't stop working. I would do a show in Australia, and then I'd fly to the UK and do a show, then I'd be in America doing a show, because work for me was my safe haven. He couldn't get to me. And I could just be me for those 5, 6, 7 hours that I was on camera.
And that's really important, I think, and we'll come on to that in terms of when you're looking at your strategies. And obviously, it's about your mental health as well. So how has it affected you in terms of your mental health?
Well, when you're abused, even on just one of the levels in a relationship, it affects you on your just daily, every day. Even though you may have left your abuser, the side effects and the mental illness carries on, from anxiety to PTSD. I mean, the list is absolutely endless. And you do need another safe haven, because the abuse doesn't stop, even if you've left them. Maybe you have kids with them and you have to still deal with them on a weekly or fortnightly basis. And an abuser never really lets go of you. No. They don't. They're always going to try and find a way in. And that's why I think it's really important to have that support system, or for your employers at least, to not just acknowledge it, but understand what goes into leaving somebody, and what's gone into for you to be able to get the strength and the power to even just carry on the next day and the next day and the next day. Yeah.
And you've done some really incredible work with Women's Aid. What's been your experience of working as a patron for Women's Aid?
Well, I didn't realise how much this has been going on in the whole entire world, especially, well, I'm in England now, but for them to bring me on as patron, I was really shocked. And then I started working with them, and I found that my story is exactly like the other people's stories. We all have the same thing that kind of happened to us, maybe on different levels of how scary or how physical or how coercive or mentally you were abused. But my story was exactly like their story. And going to different refuges and talking to these women, I was not shocked. I felt comfortable that we kind of shared something, and I'm not alone. Yeah. And I'm really, really not alone, because when I found out the statistics of how often it's happening and how many people are going through it, it's shocking. Yeah.
Which is why it's so important to implement it as part of your mental health strategy. Thanks, Mel.
Yeah. Am I done now? I can breathe.
No, you can. You can join in. You can still join in. Right. So, Paul, the spectrum of mental health is so big in terms of thinking about how to implement a mental health program at work. Why did your company put their efforts into domestic abuse?
I don't think we did initially, to be brutally honest about it. And about 18 months ago, we were talking to one of the charities in the domestic abuse space, And my initial reaction was, well, why is this a priority? And it was really only when I realised the extent of the issue, that it's at least 1 in 4 women or 1 in 6 men that will be affected in their adult lifetime, that it's not just about physical abuse, which I think is what people tend to think about, but the coercive control, the emotional abuse, the financial abuse. There's all sorts of different patterns to this, and I think it's quite hard to necessarily grasp that from the outside. I think as well the point about it's all parts of society, and does it affect people who are educated or successful? Well, yes, it does. But I still think there's a denial of that this is somehow other, that it's somewhere over there, it's sort of poor, unemployed people who we don't tend to meet very much, who, that's where the problems are concentrated. But that is so untrue, as we've seen through our own experience. And I think, moving on to what employers can do, because the word domestic kind of implies it's outside of work. And yes, it tends to be work can quite often be a safe space where you can help someone. Although actually a lot of people who are enduring domestic abuse are targeted at work as well, because that's where their abuser may feel they have least control of the situation. And I think something like 70% of people will be targeted, so it's a high proportion. And I think in terms of the specifics, we've seen higher rates of absenteeism, more erratic performance, and
in terms of signs to look out for.
Yes, when we've talked to people who've come forward, it's presented in different ways. As someone, I can talk about some specific examples where someone was on a spousal visa working for us, and they were splitting up with their husband, so needed to get a new visa sponsorship, would have to leave the country, would have to leave their partner, their 2 kids. He was being abusive. He threatened suicide. She didn't really want to leave her family behind. And that would be presented very much originally as someone needs a visa, they're going to have to leave the country, there's some domestic stuff going on that's making it more complicated. Whereas I knew, because I'd been on a couple of courses, that I didn't know very much, but I knew there was some support. There was a special Home Office exemption that meant you wouldn't have to leave the country in order to get a Tier 2 visa in this situation where you were suffering from domestic abuse. So we were able to help that individual in that particular way. So the problem was reframed. And another case where someone said initially their manager was very much, you're not performing, I'm going to put you on a performance improvement plan. And this happened, while they were pregnant as well, which should have rung alarm bells for any manager in itself. Yeah. And that's actually quite a common time, unfortunately, during pregnancy or with a newborn when abuse gets worse, which is incredibly sad. And we were able to, when she came back, she had a new manager who was able to sort of say, well, what support do you need? And the support we put in place was we launched a guide to what abuse was and the kinds of measures you could take. And a lot of it overlaps with what we were doing anyway for mental health conditions. And there is an overlap between domestic abuse and mental health anyway. But things like flexible working, we offered a week of paid leave, which originally was my sort of headline. This was going to be the thing that was going to solve everything. And I think that showed commitment, and I think it got people's awareness up. But actually, work being a safe space, paid leave is quite often the last thing you need. It can be very helpful. The person going through the performance issues went through a year-long court case, and that was really incredibly helpful to her to get some time out to talk to lawyers and other support agencies.
But that's not necessarily the answer that people want, is it? It's just knowing that people can turn somewhere. What's been the biggest challenge for you then, as a company, in putting this in place? I think well, the biggest personal challenge, I think, was getting my company to get through that awareness gap that I had. And I'm 6'4", but when you've got someone looking through you when you're trying to talk to them about this topic and say this is important, I hadn't really experienced that very much in my life at work. But getting a senior sponsor, I heard that earlier today, that was very useful in terms of getting, this is supported by the head of talent, this is something we're going to be doing. If no one comes forward, well, at least we've had a go. But in reality, since we launched last November, for the last 16 days of action, we've had over 20 people at my firm EY that have come forward. Well, that's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, we were just staggered. The experts said you might get one person in the first 6 months. People need time to build trust. You really are going to do what you say. But it was just amazing. I mean, very sad, very bittersweet that we were having to help so many people, and the stories were just horrendous. But I'm so glad we took that chance, really.
So it's kind of signposting all around, really, so people know where to turn to. Is it even like, I don't know if it was you, Lorna, or you, Paul, that said that the kind of signs on the back of the loo are actually, the ones that people notice the most.
Yeah, we tried to do that, but we got to sort of, no, that is verboten. We were going to do a guerrilla campaign, but we decided actually there were perhaps other ways we could bring people with us rather than, we wanted to do the big confrontation, you need to get this, but I had to remember it was only 6 months before that I was equally cynical that this was a priority.
Yeah.
So we've taken more of a softly approach. But I think, from what I've heard from companies that have done it, the back of loo doors is something that is now in demand as a space to do internal communications and other topics as well.
Very powerful, back of the loo. Right, Lorna. So can you just tell me a bit about your company? You're a law firm. How did you and when did you realise you needed to sort of implement some measures around domestic abuse?
Yeah. So we are an international law firm, and really, for many years, we'd only looked at domestic abuse through the lens of our community work, actually, supporting organisations like Women's Aid. It had never occurred to us that we might have people in our own organisation who are enduring domestic abuse. But for us, the wake-up call was that statistic: 1 in 4 women, 1 in 6 men are going to be affected. And given that we already had a wellbeing programme as a responsible employer, fixed with that stat, doing nothing is not an option.
Yeah.
So that was the wake-up call, and that triggered us. And like Paul has said, the key for us was getting senior sponsorship, and happily from day one, took it to our senior partner, and for him it was a no-brainer. Of course, we must act. And so we acted.
And what measures did you put in place?
Okay, so the first step was to educate key people in the business, our HR team. Interestingly, it turned out that quite a few of them had dealt with isolated cases, but there'd never really been any joined up thinking about it to realise this is something that's just going to keep on happening. So get the HR team educated. We have key managers in our business who are really trusted individuals, almost like auntie, people will go to. We made sure that they were trained because they were really well placed to spot the signs. So we got them trained up. We put information on our intranet. And crucially, that included some signposting pages to organisations like Women's Aid, Mankind, Gallup for LGBT couples, and so on. So we got the information there, and then we had to tell our people about it and make some noise. So yes, for us, and it was a battle with facilities, believe you me, but we got posters on the back of loo doors. And those posters gave real-life case studies featuring both men and women as the perpetrators. They featured everything from financial controlling behaviour, coercive control, through to rape. So, no pun intended, those posters were hard-hitting.
Yeah.
At the bottom of that poster, this line, "Help is closer than you think," and we signposted to the HR team, to our what have now become our domestic violence champions. And we sat back to see what would happen. And again, people started to come forwards. And what really struck me was that the people that came forwards, it was everyone from partners through to someone working in the kitchens. That confirmed to us this affects everyone, all stratas of society. No one is, safe, sadly, from this. So people came through in response to posters, and every single person that came forward said, it was seeing that poster that made me realise, back to your point, Mel, that what was happening to me wasn't normal. Because the perpetrators so many times will let you believe this is my fault, this is normal. So the posters went out. And I guess the other striking thing, so we had, so far, the numbers keep going up, we're a much smaller organisation than EY, but we've had about 20 people come forward so far. But remember I said we put information on the intranet. For the first few years after we put the information out there, we tracked the number of page hits we were getting on our pages explaining about domestic abuse, types of abuse, the cycle, and where to get help. every month, between 25 and 30 new people were coming onto those pages. They were staying on those pages significantly longer than any other pages on our intranet. And the single most heavily used page was the signposting page. So we knew, back to that safe space point, they were using our facilities as a space to find out the help that they could get. So it was having an impact.
So there was probably a lot more people than had come forward.
Absolutely. Dozens and dozens and dozens of people were calling on the support.
And just tell us a little bit about because your personal story took a slightly different turn, didn't it? Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so we began the campaign probably 9 or 10 years ago now, at which time, for me personally, everything was hunky-dory. I had a very charismatic, slightly moody partner, but really didn't think that I might be one of those people that would need that support. But sadly for me, a few years later, things started to go rapidly downhill. My partner never hit me, but the coercion, the control, the terror that he brought into the household, very, very controlling. So it is no exaggeration to say I was scared for my life. So the irony was not lost on me that I was one of those people that had to approach my line manager, that same senior partner, to say, yeah, this is happening to me and I need help. The help that I needed was time. I needed time to get counselling. So I knew I had to exit what was becoming a very dangerous relationship. Time off for counselling to help me understand what was happening, to process it. Time for safety planning with the police. I couldn't go to my local police force because when I was out of the office, my every minute was being watched. But I could go to the police in working hours. So I went to the City of London Police, who then spoke to my local police force. We did the safety planning, so I had all the safe words, that my address was tagged and so on. So when it came to D-Day, when I knew that I was going to have to ask him to leave, and it was either going to be he was going to crumble or he was going to come out fighting, I spoke to my local DV officer in my local force the day before, and he said, I've never known a better planned exit. And that was because my employer had given me the time and the space. Otherwise, I might have just been winging it and actually doing the wrong things and the dangerous thing. Yeah. So the safe space that my employer gave me enabled me to get out. The journey doesn't finish there, of course. The knock-on effect, and we live with the mental health conditions. So PTSD for me is my big thing. I'm so much luckier than many others, but that is still a factor, but I work through it. I can joke at work, please don't slam doors around me, it's not going to be good. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the support I've had from my employer all the way along. I never for one minute thought I would be needing that help, but I did, and it was there.
And it was the right support there, which was really important. And we were talking in the green room about if you put a strategy in place to help victims of domestic abuse, like you've said, it's ongoing, isn't it? And like Mel, you said, it's not something that just suddenly stops when you leave your husband or your wife.
No, it is ongoing, and I think the more that we can talk about it and educate people in schools, your friends, your family, I think the world would be a better, safer place, because I lived a life for 10 years not thinking that it was happening. I was in complete denial, even though it was happening, but I had nobody that I could talk to, nobody that I could turn to. So I think it's important that we educate ourselves. And, the word domestic abuse is a scary word, but I think when it's broken down... I keep going in and out.
You're right.
When it's broken down, you'll probably... realise that either you know somebody that's going through it, or you'll be able to see the signs and help somebody out.
And are there any signs that any of you can share from a employer's perspective or a colleague of someone you might be concerned about? What are the signs that you should look out for? I mean, it's not one size fits all, but are there...
There'll be a range, and some of them will be sort of performance-related. So maybe starting to be, you're coming in to work late, your performance might be slipping, you might be distracted. But there are other signs. Some of them may be physical. You may see bruising, but actually often the perpetrator will be quite clever to maybe the bruising will be below shoulder height, above the knee. But if someone's wearing a thick polo neck jumper in the middle of summer, what's going on? If a colleague is startled every time the mobile
Yeah, I was
phone
going to
goes,
say
you're
that.
getting messages
You live on
78 times a day.
eggshells,
Yeah.
panicked completely every minute of the day.
Yeah.
So, but just those changes in behaviour, and in the same way that I think, with mental health, full stop, it's asking that question, how are things, and maybe asking it a second time as well, and sort of creating that safe space where they can.
I think if somebody would have asked me that, like genuinely, sincerely asked me that, and I felt safe, I would have literally just broken down. But it took me 10 years to get the strength by myself in a very isolated, coercive, terrible, abusive marriage to actually get the strength to go, you know what, I'm getting out.
Yeah.
And some women don't get out because they have nobody to talk to, they have nobody to turn to, and they're just left there like a withering wreck thinking it's all them and they're the crazy ones.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing, isn't it? And you've mentioned this, it's kind of knowing that it's not you, it's not in your mind. And that
No, it's not in your mind, not
is-
at all. Because I think one of the things also is that your abuser is very, very good at making you feel like it is all your fault, or making you feel like that did not just happen, even though you've got the scars and the scratches and your brain's scrambling to try and figure out what just happened 20 minutes ago. You know, like my abuser would go, do you want a cup of tea after the abuse? And I'd be like, I know that you just abused me, and I know that this was really, really bad, but now you're acting like nothing's happened.
Yeah.
And it leaves you with all kinds of things that go on in your head, and it does leave you with a lot of mental illness scarrings that you have to deal with day in, day out.
And it's also even harder potentially when you've got children with your abuser.
Yeah,
I guess.
it is. I think it's because you carry so much guilt when you're with your abuser and when you're not with your abuser, you know, because you've broken up a family, you've broken up a home, daddy's not around as much as he used to be, and you're living separately. And then the effect that it has on your kids, maybe they've seen too much, maybe they've just heard too much. It affects not just you, but everyone around you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think for employers, it is very related to what you do with mental health first aid, for example. You're listening without judgment, guiding people to appropriate professional help, because, you know, we do training at EY, as Lorna's done at Gowling's, but that only takes people so far to a level of awareness. And the main benefit we had was engaging with a program called Everyone's Business that gives us access to an advocate and counselling. And at first I was going, well, what's that going to do? But that, you know, paid leave is much more important. But actually that's just been so invaluable to be able to say, look, you know, we can provide support, but we need you to, if you want to engage with the experts, they'll be much more helpful than we will be in terms of what can be done generally. Obviously, we can give more specific advice on the workplace there.
And it's ongoing support too that you
Yeah.
need. It's not just a one-hit wonder thing. You need constant reassurance and guidance, because what you have to sieve your way through is a maze. It
Yeah,
really
because the
is.
journey almost starts when you leave, I guess, doesn't it?
Well, the healing starts, but
Yeah.
it's a long journey.
Yeah. Lorna, if I asked you if there are 5 things an employer could put in place today, what could you share with me?
Right, A, B, C, D, E. A, awareness. So if you've already got mental health first aiders, mental health champions, bring domestic violence into their awareness and get them trained up. And also remember as well, we're not just talking about domestic violence affecting women as well. This affects anyone, men as well. So they need to make sure that they're aware this could happen to anyone. So awareness. B, be vigilant. So back to the points we were talking about, just looking out for those signs, those telltale signs that someone might be experiencing domestic abuse. C, culture. Those posters on the back of the doors were the game changer, because it gave people permission to talk about domestic violence. Once you start talking about it, that person who has been suffering in silence for many years may feel actually the power is there to change. So culture is hard to change overnight, but those posters came damn close to changing our culture overnight. D, direct. We are not the experts, okay? We cannot actually fix what is going on at home, but we can signpost to organisations that help men and women, anyone that's experiencing direct domestic abuse. So work in partnership, as an employer, work in partnership with the experts. Many of them are charities. Please support these charities. They do incredible work. So direct. And then the last one is expertise, okay? This is an area where a little knowledge can be a dangerous thing. So really do make sure that you understand what you're doing. Take the time. And if you're unsure, ask for help, okay? Because unwittingly, you might find you're doing something that is maybe putting one of your colleagues in danger. So we had a colleague who knew a colleague was experiencing domestic abuse and was walking with her. So you had two women walking to the bus stop because the colleague was being stalked. But actually, of course, this female colleague was putting herself in danger. Okay, or, you know, the classic thing, which often is said in the very best of intentions, well, just leave him or her. And sadly, leaving can actually be, it's an absolute flashpoint. It can be a very, very dangerous time. So understand, work alongside the experts, but the difference you can make when you do all those things, testament, here, it can make a huge difference.
Brilliant.
Yeah, and if I can add, I think it was said earlier that we like to come up with solutions to problems, and this is one that you can't solve for someone else. You can help them, you can support them, you can guide them to the experts who can do that. But I think that's why we perhaps shy away from asking people how they really are, because we're afraid of what the answer's really going to be and what we then have to do about it. But if I can give one thing, it would be for organisations to join the Employers Initiative on Domestic Abuse. It's free to join. It provides great knowledge sharing, quarterly updates with the meeting in the House of Commons committee rooms. And it's just a good way to access other support, because to Lorna's point, to say we want to raise awareness of domestic abuse without that support in place, I think is, well, you're just leaving people hanging, and it's just really going to damage any trust you're trying to build.
Yeah, really good advice. We've got time for a few questions. So I think there's one at the bottom, but I can't read it all because the time's eclipsing it. How can you support the children of a domestic abuse relationship, especially those who are now adults and struggling with what they've seen? Any advice from you guys? You talked about...
Yeah, I mean, we've had examples of when we launched our campaign of people who aren't enduring abuse themselves but did when they were children. And they've had help, but I'm sure there are others who haven't had help, and it comes out later on. So I think that'd be more into the mental health care pathways that we have in place in order to support them through, say, an occupational health referral in the first instance.
Yeah, and I would say for if you're supporting a colleague who has endured domestic abuse or is enduring it, ask about their family, because if there are children involved, those children will absolutely, they'll be witnessing it, they will be impacted. Children are like sponges, they'll take it all in.
Yeah.
So if you have an occupational health scheme that applies to family members, for heaven's sake, signpost them to that to make sure that they can maybe get, depending on the age of the children, play therapy, counselling support, but the earlier you can intervene with those young people, the better.
Yeah.
And my daughter, who's 20 years old now, she teamed up with Women's Aid and she created a T-shirt called "It's Not Our Fault," because I think kids, they do think it's their fault, just like I thought it was my fault. And I think, talking about it until you can't talk about it anymore, especially with your kids, if they're of the appropriate right age, if not, alternative therapy, yeah.
And that's why you put, somebody's asked what the 15 steps are, but they're in the back of your book. I can't remember them all now. But that's why you put that at the back of your book, wasn't it? Just for people to think about their situation and kind of think, is this happening to me? Is my money being controlled?
Am I being controlled? Is my phone being controlled? Am I being controlled? What I wear, how I act?
Yeah. Friends kind of not
being around anymore, or not being allowed to come and see you. Yeah, I mean, the list is endless.
Yeah.
But
And as well as buying Mel's book, obviously, there are other charities
No, we've got to get a few plugs.
that will list support. There's a great app called the Bright Sky app where, if you know someone, you've got a friend who you think might be affected, it's got a section there about questions you can ask and routes to support. So that's run by a charity, or launched by a charity called Hestia that do a lot of work in this space. But as Lorna said, there are lots of charities doing great work.
yeah.
Can I just bring in one slightly different angle, which is when we introduced our information on our intranet, we also put information on there for people who were concerned that maybe they were perpetrators, or if you were worried that you knew someone who was a perpetrator, because those statistics, 1 in 4 are enduring, in any size workforce, we are probably going to have people who are perpetrators as well, and we want to help them to stop perpetrating. So has anyone come forward to us? No. But have those pages received hits? Yes.
Oh, have they? That's really...
So you need to really think about this in the round as well.
Yeah, we've had a couple of cases, but really very much when people are being prosecuted for perpetrating. And my view is we should be supporting those people. You know, if they're bringing the firm into disrepute, that might be a conduct issue, but it shouldn't be the knee-jerk reaction is we don't want those people in the organisation. And my view is let's look at what's been going on and what support we can provide, which might be the soft HR approach. But I do think the prevalence of it must be so significant that just to fire everyone is just shifting the problem elsewhere.
Help to stop.
Yeah. I think we've got time for a couple more questions. So, Mel, what gave you the courage to leave your abusive partner, and what advice would you give to others feeling too scared to leave?
Well, my situation was quite sad because my dad was on his deathbed and I hadn't really spoken to him in years because I'd been cut off from my family, my friends, my everything. So I decided that I was just going to fly over to the UK with my daughter, even though my dad wasn't talking to me. And even though my then husband had hidden my passport, so I had to get an emergency passport because he'd heard me on the phone saying, I'm going to go and see my dad. So when I eventually got there, about a month later, he was still alive, well, barely, and he died and looking at me. And before he took his last breath, I said, I am going to go and divorce that monster. And then he died. So I was like, well, I have to go through with this. I don't want to be estranged from my mom and my sister or the rest of my family any longer. So I got back on the plane, packed up my stuff as much as I could without him realising, and then left that week. I had nowhere to go. And I couldn't really tell anybody, but I managed.
Yeah. And what would your advice be to anybody who is feeling too scared to leave their partner?
I think the worst thing you can do is stay, because the only road that you're going to face is possible death, to be honest.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't kill you physically, it will definitely kill you mentally.
Yeah.
And especially if you've got kids involved, you just have to leave in the best way possible for you, whether it be getting help, telling a friend, because you walk around with such guilt and shame, you don't really want to tell anybody, but you have to. You have to get the help, or even like Women's Aid have an online 24-hour call system where you can call up anonymously and they'll walk you through the stages on how to leave.
Yeah.
Like right there and then. And I wish I would have even known that earlier myself.
Organisations like Women's Aid are just invaluable, aren't they?
Yeah.
So one more question. As a manager, I believe I have an employee suffering domestic abuse. What organisations can help employers provide better support? So Women's Aid, I mean, we've talked about some of these, haven't we, which we'll be able to share afterwards, I'm sure.
Yeah, Mankind, Gallup for LGBT people. There's a range of them, and maybe after this we can do some signposting to those organisations.
And I think in the takeouts from this, there'll be some signposting as well. Okay. I think we should wrap up now, but what a brilliant panel, a really worthwhile discussion. So hopefully you've taken some great advice from the panellists. Mel, Paul and Lorna, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.